Welcome to Expert Table Talks, a series of the European Blind Union, brought to you by the EBU Braille Working Group.
Let's get started, because we would like to start on time, which we did not, but we would like to end on time, which we'll see, we'll try to. So hello everyone, my name is Oleg Shevkun and I'm one of the hosts of this wonderful table talk. But let me start by saying that this table talk is organized by the working group on Braille of the European Blind Union. And we'll talk about that group and the webinars that will be taking place in the next 4 months, just for organization purposes. The next hour will be taken by the panelists. We will say and we'll try to explain, well, I was about to say all that we know, but knowing the kind of people here, if we tried to tell you all that we know about Braille displays, it would take a lot of time and it would be very boring at some point. We'll try to make it interesting. And then the last 30 minutes, there will be a Q&A time, the time for questions and answers. This webinar is hosted by the Braille Working Group. So before going anywhere else, let me introduce the chairman of the working group on Braille of the European Blind Union, Rainer Delgado of DBSV, the German Federation of Blind and Visually Impaired People. Rainer, hello and welcome to the show.
Yeah, hello, good evening or good day all together. I'm very happy that we are meeting here so internationally. Yeah, we are the working group of European Blind Union. So we were funded by this organization, and we are, let's say 12 volunteers working on this topic of Braille. Some of us are in their professional work also in the field of Braille, like, for example, me, but many of the others too. And yeah, we have a lot of projects we are working on, and I think Michal has the best overview about our last activities that maybe you have also noticed some of them.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Michal Tkačík, member of this group. I'm from Slovakia, so we are really very international. Our projects is quite difficult to sum it up all, but I will choose the most important, and the last project of our group was the Braille 200 initiative, which ran for last year. For each day of the last year, we published some very interesting article about Braille. It was really a huge work of a few people, and then a huge contribution from all the people around the world, because we collected really fantastic content of Braille in whatever situation and the shape and whatever you can imagine. If you are interested in the content, it is still available and will be available on our platform livingbraille.eu. This platform is one of our projects. Again, it's here for more years. I think 2022 was the first time when we started this portal, and our aim is to collect Braille-related topics in daily life, in technology, in education materials, and so on. And everybody is warmly welcomed to come to Living Braille and contribute the topics or content they would like to share. So these are the most important, I would say, and I will mention very shortly the last, but not least, project of ours, our group, was a video we made in Spain. It's 7 minutes long video speaking about Braille in very short and I think very friendly way, why the Braille is important and what it means for blind people. So that's our group. Thank you.
That's really, really cool, Michal. So, Raina, Michal, we do have an international group, and there are people here from different countries represented in that group, and several of us are here in this table talk today. Just for starters, so Michal is in Slovakia, and Raina is in Berlin, Germany. So I work for Vispero, but I'm here on my personal time, and I'm not representing the company. I'm in Marburg, Germany, actually about 700 meters or 0.5 miles away from Blista, which is this country's largest educational and rehabilitation establishment. I don't get to visit Blista often, but it's just nice to be here in this very special place for the blindness community in Germany. But we also have experts, or our panelists from different countries and different organizations ready to share our expertise with you. And before we introduce the panelists, let me tell you that we've got four table talks. And we thought, hey, what are the 4 pain points? Areas of struggle when working with Braille displays, and how can we systematically present them? And we came up with 4 C's. One is connecting. So how do you connect your Braille display to your device and make sure it works? And I mean works, not just sometimes works or sort of works. So one is connecting. The other one is controlling. So your Braille display is a whole control terminal, which is highly configurable, and you can do all kinds of things with that. But sometimes strange stuff happens when commands get reassigned, or an update to an operating system comes, and some of our shortcuts no longer quite work. So how do you control your devices from the Braille display? And did you think, for example, that you can use an iWatch with a Braille display, almost like an iPhone, but because it's got full control, you've got a full keyboard for an Apple Watch in your Braille display. And we'll get to that in our February installment. Then in March, we'll be talking about consuming. That's consuming contents with a Braille display, and the plethora of Braille codes. And what happens if you choose a wrong Braille code, and then you activate Braille translation, and you're in a mess, and you want to get out of that mess? So how do you? That's our subject for March. And then in April, we'll talk about creating. That's creating content with a Braille display. You're not going to write War and Peace. Nobody's going to write War and Peace, and that's probably good. And yet, your Braille display certainly offers excellent opportunities to create new content. And sometimes we don't quite realize them, and we don't use them to their potential. And we'll talk about this in April. Now, to make that possible, we're joined in every of our sessions by our distinguished experts. And I'm having a hard time because we have several experts and I don't want to forget anybody. So if at the end of it I forget somebody, ladies and gentlemen, remind me, okay? And let's start. I think we'll start with Ron Miller. Ron, hello, and tell us about yourself and who you are with and what's your expertise level with Braille displays.
Well, Oleg, it is such a pleasure to be here with everybody. My name is Ron Miller. Oleg, I have known you since, I want to say 2003 or 4, something like that, a long time.
That's right.
Yes, it's been a while, and I am the Accessibility Excellence Advocate for Home and Independent Living with the National Federation of the Blind. It's a new position for me, and it's one I'm enjoying very much, working with a great team of people here. And up until about 3 weeks ago, I lived in Safety Harbor, Florida, where the temperatures were usually very nice, and they would be oh, this time of year in the 60s or 70s Fahrenheit, which I guess is in the teens C. And I have moved myself and my family, the moms and wife and my son and the two dogs. We packed up everything and we have moved to Maryland. I live on the outskirts of Baltimore, Maryland, near the headquarters for the Federation now. And it is not in the teens C or in the 60s or 70s Fahrenheit. We have many inches of snow, and the temperature is it's getting down to about 8 degrees Fahrenheit. I have no idea what that would be C, but well below zero. So
That's terribly below zero. Yeah.
yes, it
If
is
somebody
for all of
on our panel, or if you know the answer in the chat, tell us. I could ask iPhone, but anyway.
it got down to 8 degrees Fahrenheit last night. And so all of us Floridians are we go into a semi-conscious state and fall out of the trees and that kind of thing. So it's new for
Freezing
us.
Floridians.
That's right. So it's new for us. I have learned how to shovel snow and those kinds of things just in the last week. We had a big storm come through. But I'm very glad to be here. My background in access technology goes all the way back to May of 2000 when I was hired by Blazy Engineering, and I've been involved on a number of levels with braille displays and blindness hardware since then. So it would be 26, almost 27 years. And I hesitate to call myself an expert, but I am very, very comfortable in conversing with braille displays. I've managed the hardware as a product manager. I've been a quality assurance coordinator. I've been a trainer. So I'm comfortable with braille displays, and if I must be called an expert, I would say I'm an expert with a small e, not a capital E.
Okay, how about panelist?
Yeah, I could be a panelist.
Okay, that's
That
better.
works.
Yeah, right. Thank you. And now on we go to Israel and Adi Kushner, or Adi Kushner. How shall I say it?
Hello, everyone. My name is Adi. I'm from Israel. I'm 28 years old at the moment. I I'm here, of course, on a personal level, not representing anyone, but I have my own company called Access Mind, and I also do some work for Orbit Research on the side of it. And my background, I have been in this field for 15 years. Started from working on screen reading software before I even had access to braille displays due to financial reasons. Started working on right to left support for the right to left language support for JAWS for Windows. Then slowly entered into this field and realized that that is what I want to do. I want to be involved in developing solutions for our community, and Braille is my one of my top, one of my highest priorities. I use Braille every day, and I'm focused on developing various Braille products, as well as also I was selling, and I still am selling Braille technology in Israel. So yeah, I would say that I am happy. I'm very happy to be a panelist in this group and to contribute to some of the discussion. I, of course, started as a user. Now I am more a developer of this equipment. So if before I was only criticizing why everything is not working
Now
well,
you are being
now
criticized.
I am being criticized, and I'm also finally understanding the complexity of some of these topics as I do my own stuff. So it is funny. I live in a city called Modi'in, which is a bit halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And yeah, in general, happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Adi. Now, if you've been following the Braille 200 campaign, and if you've been receiving our emails or reading our livingbraille.eu website, you're certainly familiar with the next person I'm about to introduce. Svetlana Vasilyeva lives in Russia, but she's a person of international significance. Normally, she will attend all kinds of webinars and table talks as a listener. But she's got a lot to contribute. Hey, Svetlana, hello and welcome. What can you tell us about yourself?
Hello, my name is Svetlana, and yes, I'm a fan and a strong supporter of Braille 200 project, and it was really great, and people did a hard and great and wonderful work, and I appreciate that. I work for, I'm a lead assistive technology specialist, and I work for Elite Group Technology, but today I'm representing myself here. It's an honor to be here among such a great experts. I wouldn't call myself expert, but I can be a panelist. I know something about Braille, I guess, because I'm using Braille, I would say 14 hours a day on average.
Wow.
And so for a long, long time.
Svetlana, mine is only 8, so you beat me to that.
And since we were talking about the weather, I live in Novosibirsk. It's a city in Siberia. Actually, we call it the capital of Siberia, but other Siberian big cities wouldn't agree. And we had a minus 35 degrees Celsius this winter.
That's Celsius. And I've never converted Fahrenheit to Celsius.
It's like minus 31 Fahrenheit, I guess.
Okay. So thank you, Svetlana. Now, some time ago, we were talking with Svetlana, and she said, there's this fantastic group in the UK called the Braillists Foundation. And I was thinking it must be a group of Braille producers, like publishers, RNIB and others. And I went to their website, and it turned out to be something else in all possible respects. The Braillists Foundation has promoted this table talk. And here on our panel, we have Matthew Horspool. Matthew, hey, welcome to the show.
Well, hello, Oleg. Hello, everybody else. It's brilliant to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I come to you from Coventry in the United Kingdom, where it is currently 6 degrees Celsius. So I think we would consider that to be quite cold, but I think some other people on the panel would consider it to be quite warm. So, yeah, really great to be here. The Braillists Foundation is a user group based out of the UK, and because of the way that we get funding, quite a lot of our projects have a UK focus. But we do have quite a lot of people on our mailing list and who attend our presentations from outside the UK, and they're always very welcome, wherever that's possible. Clearly, if we're doing face-to-face events, we tend to do them in the UK, and it's not so easy for people from overseas to come to them. But yeah, we really like having an international perspective on our online groups. We run a whole series of masterclasses and Braille question and answer sessions and things like that. And you can find out more at braillists.org. I help to run the Braillists with a small group of other people. Also, in my own right, I'm an assistive technology specialist and assistive technology trainer. I am on the private beta team for JAWS. I'm also on the private beta team for the Brailliant Mantis range of Braille displays, and actually on the Appleseed program as well. So I get to see quite a lot of pre-release code and put it through its paces before the rest of the world gets to see it. And that's liberating, and it's also very frustrating when I have to tell people that my computer's not working and I can't tell them why because I'm under non-disclosure and it's not working because there's a bug that hasn't been resolved yet. But yeah, I feel like I have some expertise in getting Braille displays connected and working. It's something that I do for people on a fairly regular basis through my day job. I actually presented a masterclass on the topic for the Braillists. A lot has changed since that masterclass, so I really appreciate this opportunity through the EBU Braille Working Group to present a more up-to-date picture of where the world is at today.
Well, thank you, Matthew. And there are several working group members here, people like Peter Brass from Germany, and we have here Anna from Spain and other members of our group, and Michal, of course, and Aina. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have something to contribute or something to ask, and there will be Q&A time at the end, please do not hesitate to do so. Now, even now you can send, and I'm just talking to everybody in the webinar, if you have a question, you can set it in the chat, and we'll get to those questions in due time. But here on my desk, I have a tangled, just a number of tangled wires. The wires that are not just connected, but they're tangled in such a way that you pull on one of them and everything goes. You like pulling everything else. Sometimes I like to untangle them. My wife likes to untangle them, and then life is just easier for some time, and then they get somehow tangled again. So let's start by untangling the connection issues. And so I'll be asking questions and asking our panelists to contribute. I'm thinking of contemporary Braille displays connection as a matrix. So one axis of the matrix, or one axis of the diagram, is how they connect, how they just are connecting to one another. And that would be, on a most general case, either USB or Bluetooth. Now, the veterans among us can remember of serial connections and even parallel connections. I remember them, but it's nice to forget at this point. So let's think of, in very simple terms, USB when there's a cable, and Bluetooth when there is no cable. And we'll get to some more details in a moment. Now, the other axis, though, is how they're talking. Not through which medium, like by waves or like by the wire, but how they're talking, which language they're talking. And that's HID Braille versus legacy display drivers. And we hear a lot about HID Braille these days. I got an email from a disappointed user who said, I just got my new device, an Android device. And I was hoping, because it's new, there's going to be HID Braille, and I connected it and nothing works. Well, it turned out to be an Android 14 device, even though that was sold to that person in December last year. We'll get to that, and we'll get to the ins and outs of this. But panelists, how can we explain in very simple terms the difference between HID Braille and legacy drivers and the way it matters for us when we start to connect our Braille display? And anybody can volunteer. I'm not going to call out names, of course.
HID Braille versus legacy Braille. So when you plug a device into a computer, or when you connect a device to a computer, because we can talk about Bluetooth as well, the computer needs to know what device that is. So it just sees, hey, something's connected. It's usually got a random string of letters and numbers, and it says, hello, device 2B6F37D has connected. The computer doesn't have a clue what this device is. It just knows it's connected. So there needs to be this thing called a driver, which exists on the computer, which says, whenever you see this device that's connected, this is a Braille display, and this is what you need to do with it. And what HID does, in a nutshell, HID stands for Human Interface Device. What HID and HID Braille does, in a nutshell, is build those drivers into the operating system. So whether that's Windows or Mac or iOS or Android. So as soon as that Braille display connects, a bit like a keyboard or a mouse or a Bluetooth speaker or a headset or anything else that gets connected, it connects and the computer says, yep, I know that this is a Braille display. If you didn't have HID Braille, so talking about the legacy drivers, what would happen is the device would connect, the computer wouldn't know what it was, and so you would have to have a special driver installed, and particularly so for USB, not quite so much for Bluetooth, but certainly for USB, you had to make sure that there was a driver installed into the operating system from a third party. So you'd have to go to your Braille display manufacturer's website and download a special USB driver, or install it from a CD-ROM if you can remember those days, or even a floppy disk if you can remember those days. But you'd have to install a driver, and HID, you don't have to do that. That's a very simple explanation as I see it.
Thank you. Anybody wants to add anything to this one?
Yes,
Good.
very well explained by Matthew, of course, as always. But just to elaborate on some things, there is some difference between. There are two things actually. There's some difference between between interfacing with HID Braille devices versus standard HID devices. For example, if you plug in a keyboard, the OS, the operating system, knows how to operate the keys and how to work directly with that keyboard. Don't expect that if you plug in a HID compatible Braille display, it will do the same. For example, you won't be able to control the PC with the Perkins keyboard of your Braille display just from the operating system. And also, there is a difference between a HID USB connection, which some Braille displays already had. For example, there are many devices. On some of them, you have to install a third-party driver for USB to work, exactly as Matthew described. But on other devices, the display itself is being recognized by the operating system as a HID interface device, but they don't support the so-called HID Braille protocol, which is
Let me interrupt you for a moment. There's a difference then between HID device and HID Braille device.
Yes.
Wow. So I have this old Vario Ultra 20 in my.
It is a HID device,
but it's not HID Braille.
Yes, it does not support the HID Braille protocol. So even if you connect what is the HID Braille protocol? So basically, we will touch on that a bit when we will talk about the legacy drivers. But in addition to having a driver for the particular Braille display to be properly recognized via the USB, for example, if you use the Vario Ultra is not a good example, but some other devices like the Focus up until recently and other displays where you had to install a driver for the actual USB connection to Windows for Windows to work. And then on top of that, in some cases, you also needed to add a screen reader driver to support the specific Braille protocol that each vendor had. Previously, each vendor had their own protocol, which screen readers used to drive the Braille display. That has been converted to HID first on many devices. So there was a transition period where the USB connection itself was being established without a driver, but the Braille protocol that actually drives the Braille display needed to still be treated via a legacy screen reader driver because it was appropriate to the particular Braille display vendor. HID
that
Braille
means you had to install a driver, or the screen reader would have to have it installed.
Yes. HID Braille specifically, in addition to the HID USB connection, introduces a unified Braille protocol, which, if implemented correctly by the screen reader of choice, would allow every Braille display to be operable using that protocol without developing additional screen reader drivers in most cases. So there is a difference between a HID connection for proper USB support versus HID Braille in terms of the actual protocol used by assistive technology.
Thank you, Adi. Ron Miller.
Yes, fantastic, you guys. I can only add to that. As Matthew and Adi have both said, this is true in principle. They didn't come out and say it, but it is implicit. This is true in principle, but when you get down to actually executing, it is a little less different. To say I can operate my Braille display with the HID Braille protocol implemented, that is the American expression would be, this is the car, this is the fuel, but depending on what you're doing, your mileage may vary. How far you can,
We'll get to that in just a sec, Ron.
Okay, well, where I was headed simply was because displays are different, and I know you want to touch on the pro and cons, Oleg, because the displays are different, the amount of support you will find is going to be different, and it must be kept in mind. I'll leave it at that.
Screen reader.
Yes, that's the support I meant. I'm sorry. Screen reader support will be different, and the control layout and everything can make a difference as well.
So we have this matrix. We have 2 axes. That gives us 4 quadrants for untangling our wires. We can have a USB connection with HID Braille. We can have Bluetooth connection with HID Braille. We can have USB legacy driver connection or Bluetooth legacy Braille connection. Now, of course, that's not that easy. Our 4th quadrant is a little bit more problematic.
Yes.
But I don't want to go there right now. Now, I'm going to play an advertiser for a moment because we'll be looking at all of those 4 quadrants. And we'll start with USB HID Braille connection. And I'm going to play an advertiser. You know those advertisers who will tell you all the good news. And experts, including Svetlana, by the way, please let me know what you think about it, because I think Ron was getting to this already. Okay, I'm playing the advertiser. Just purchased this latest Braille display of ours. Just plug in your USB cable, turn it on, and it works. The full richness of Braille with any device you choose. Your response?
Far from it, in most cases. First of all, if we're talking about HID Braille only, right? At this point, via USB. So
yes, absolutely. I'm trying to sell you HID Braille over USB.
Yes.
Well, actually, I'm trying to sell you a Braille display.
So it actually, first of all, depends the support you're going to get depends, at least the basic support, right? The ability to read Braille, correctly pan, and do some basic keyboard operations depend on the screen reader, and in some cases the operating system of choice. But today with the operating systems, it's smoother, at least over USB. So it generally comes to the screen reader. There are some screen readers that support HID Braille with, I would say, most of their core features. For example, recent updates to JAWS. Apple with VoiceOver on the Mac does that. So they have generic keyboard mappings and the ability to execute input, output, and panning and some controlling of the operating system with Apple and JAWS recently, versus other situations where screen readers might support HID Braille on an even more basic level. For example, if you use Windows with NVDA and you will connect a HID Braille display, it will detect it and you'll be able to read and pan from it and type. But everything related to controlling your computer is not going to work out of the box with the Perkins keyboard if your display has one. So, and I'm not even talking about like special features of a particular display. I'm talking about generic things that should work across everywhere. In fact, users might notice that even on existing devices, if they are switching from legacy USB driver connection to HID, if their device got updated, on some of the screen readers, they'll notice some differences.
Let's untangle this though, folks.
Yeah.
Okay, let's think of Braille displays. And we are doing this webinar in January 2026. Even in
Yes.
February, things may change. What Braille displays, to your knowledge, support this type of connection, HID Braille via USB?
So we have the Focus, which got it through an update not too long ago.
Yeah,
Right.
but through an update. So you have to
Yes.
update the firmware. And that.
Yes.
Right.
Out of the box, the HumanWare series of displays, the Brilliant, Mantis, and others, they supported HID. They were relying on legacy drivers for some screen readers, but they always had HID support in case people wanted them to do it. The customer wanted it, and on some operating system it is used by default. What else? The Emotion, I think.
Emotion.
From
Well,
HIMS
does it
supports-
support it over USB or just over Bluetooth, or is
Over
it
USB.
just
Which one?
the
Which one?
Emotion?
The Emotion just over USB.
Just over
USB.
USB.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I knew there was a
Yes.
limitation. Couldn't remember what
Yes.
it was.
This is the display I'm actually driving as a primary at the moment. And who else supports?
A lot of the help tech displays do. So things
Oh,
like
HelpTech added that? Nice.
I'm
nice
pretty
to
sure.
know.
I thought the Activator Pro and the Activator supported.
Maybe these
HID.
new ones. Okay, so
Maybe I'm wrong.
right.
I don't know. And a lot of the multi-lines do. So the dot pad supports HID Braille.
The Monarch does,
Monarch
too.
supports HID Braille.
Yep.
I think probably the new haptic stuff supports HID Braille.
Is
The
it-
Canute does not. So,
the Canute.
so don't do that.
Yeah, okay.
And the Orbit products, Addy, do they not support HID Braille?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Orbit, I think, supported it for a while, but yeah, I forgot to mention.
Now, because HID Braille is pretty new, is my assumption correct that you would have to consult your Braille display manual for most Braille displays to enable it? For newer displays, it will come out of the box by default. But for some others, you have to figure out exactly how to enable that type of support.
For HumanWare displays, no. It's enabled.
Just
That's their
works.
default mode.
Well, in HumanWare, it's pretty awkward, actually.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the manual to say because so HumanWare, the USB port will switch between legacy mode and HID Braille
Absolutely.
mode, depending on
Automatically?
the very first program that accessed it. So
Yeah.
you don't always know whether the HumanWare is going to come up in HID or legacy. You just kind of have to reboot it and hope for the best.
In fact, it's recognized as both at once when you connect it to USB. We had a long-standing bug which was fixed in JAWS recently because of that issue, which prevented HID displays from being auto-detected because, yeah,
Because you don't know
HumanWare-
what to detect.
Yeah, because HumanWare devices are actually recognized as both. On the Emotion, immediately when you open the terminal connection for the first time, you can choose which mode you like. If you know what to choose, of course, that can be confusing sometimes too. On the Focus, I don't know if new units come with HID by default, but
What do you mean new units? Focus 5.
new they're shipping out.
The
these
new
days.
ones, probably not. But
Not.
none may
So then you
this.
have to manually choose it.
Yeah, you have to choose it.
I think even after the firmware update, and I'm conscious Ron is chomping at the bit to come in. I think even after the firmware update,
Yes.
it's on serial by default.
It
I
is.
think you have to really
Yes.
try
Ron,
quite
go ahead.
hard.
Oh
to get
no,
it out of
Adi knows this stuff too. Yeah, it's on by default. I have not played with it in a while because my plate's been full of moving, but I found that you had to pay attention to how you were configuring and what you were doing. I think they've streamlined that process a little bit.
But
That's
I
right.
just checked, by the way, it's off by default.
Yeah.
And
You have to go after it.
Yeah,
And
the
on
newer
the-
the Braille displays, the more likelihood that these things will be activated by default.
Yeah.
on Orbit, it's also off by default, from what I know. And I don't know about the Monarch. I assume it would be on, but I don't know.
Well, and is it worth, sorry to derail this slightly, is it worth making a clarification on the Orbits in particular? Because Orbit has two modes. It has HID Orbit mode and HID Braille mode. So I presume HID Orbit is the mode you're talking about where it's HID over USB, that the connection is HID, but the protocol is serial.
Yes,
Orbit
very
protocol.
similar to devices like the Vario Ultra
Yes.
and some other
Whereas-
vendors.
Yeah, whereas
There's not as much
HID
definition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
HID Braille would be HID on both sides. It would be HID USB and HID Braille protocol.
Now, apparently configuring this HID Braille or HID Braille stuff is not always easy, and now I need to understand whether it really makes sense. So we move to the other side of this side of the
Yeah.
equation, the devices. Okay, Android. Starts on A. Android.
USB or
USB. Yeah, USB.
USB is supported from, I don't recall which TalkBack version. I believe even before
think-
TalkBack 15 for
Latest for sure, though.
yeah, USB is working, should work. On Android, they rely on VRLTTY, and USB should work. If you have TalkBack, I believe.
That's as of Android 15. You just connect.
No, this is Android 15 is Bluetooth support.
Yeah,
Okay.
USB was earlier.
USB was earlier. Yes.
Okay.
And iOS also supports. Mac OS supports. And I don't know. Well, Windows, as
So
we
I-
discussed now.
Yeah. So I think iOS only supports it if it's on a device with a USB. Oh, no. I was going to say if it's on a device with a USB-C port, but that might not be right. Can you use the camera connection kit to get it onto a
Works for
Lightning
me.
device? Yeah.
I
Please.
tried it. It worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it works.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good to know. You don't just have to have a USB-C port for it to
So
work.
that's if you have the old style Apple port. What's the name
The
of that?
Lightning.
A Lightning connector.
Lightning, right?
Yeah.
You can use the camera accessory, which has USB-C, and you can still connect those things. Okay, and for Windows, it depends on the screen reader.
Yeah.
USB or
Yeah.
HID Braille support was introduced in JAWS. I should say what 2020.
I think 2025.
I think 25, the last build. Yeah. I would
20
add that I think 25.
5 in the middle of the
Yeah.
cycle.
Well,
It wasn't last or a year ago, October.
But it was
after.
just for basic input output. It did not have pre-configured key maps unless
No.
unless a specific vendor worked with Vispero to add these
Yeah.
key maps. They have been added for some multi-line products and the humanware products on HID to avoid legacy at the end of the 2025 cycle.
But not
But,
across the board.
2026 now has, even for displays that don't have special key maps for themselves, a very good generic key map for use. So I would say JAWS 2026 supports most of its core features with HID Braille out of the box, even if the vendor did nothing.
And
that.
NVDA?
NVDA supports reading, input-output cursor routing, and panning and keyboard entry by default. But commands for controlling windows are not assigned for HID Braille displays by default.
So I was about to ask you about advantages and disadvantages of this type of connection, but I'm going to reframe the question. Do you yourselves use USB for this HID Braille connection? If so, in what circumstances, in what contexts, and why? Why do you prefer jumping through all those hoops?
I lose my HID hat because for the sake of simplicity, I just use the USB connection as a serial device, USB serial.
The old style.
I do simply because with my Focus and JAWS, which is primarily how I use it, it's plug and play. With VoiceOver on my phone, it's recognized. I mean, the device ID for iOS has been around since version 3 or 4, I believe. So I'm lazy, and so I haven't jumped through the hoops.
But there's no reason to change.
Not for me. I mean, I did it when I had to test it in my other life, but since then I have not. So I'll throw it to Adi and Matthew and everybody else.
In my case, I do use it at the moment because the Emotion, which is the primary display I'm driving for my work setup, and I use JAWS as my primary screen reader, and it is better supported with HID Braille compared to their own legacy driver. And
you don't even have to install. Like, you go to a website, like even with Selvas, okay, and they'll tell you've got to install this USB driver. No, you don't.
This is this is for their other displays. It's not for the Emotion. Right. Even with the legacy driver, the Emotion works over HID as a USB device. But in terms of the screen reader, I do personally use it because of the Emotion. When I had the Focus, I did not bother because there was no reason to.
Yeah.
I'm a HumanWare person, so I have a Mantis and occasionally drive a Brailliant. And yeah, no, I haven't made the switch over to HID. Actually, I did, when the HID driver very, very first came out, I made the switch to see how robust the HID driver was in JAWS. And it was amazingly robust, and I spent a whole afternoon creating a key map to make it work. And then I got to a point where I got back to it the next morning to finish it off and just couldn't face finishing it off. And so went back to Legacy. I also have access to a Focus and tried to Focus in HID on iOS. And that was a very interesting experience. A lot of the key maps just didn't come across. So there was a key map, but it wasn't the key map I was used to. And I really couldn't face reassigning all those gestures on my iPhone to where
now it's done for us. Luckily.
It's done now. Okay, that's good to know.
But for a moment, can you imagine a sighted person buying a car and having to create a key map?
Exactly.
And discovering whether the keys work by trial and error.
Yeah. This is exactly what I was going to say, that this is what I said in the beginning, that, as much as everyone is happy because there is a unified protocol, it's not that there is a common agreement between screen reader vendors even on rules of interaction with it. So everyone does what they want to do, or what is commercially viable for them to do, or what they think is appropriate. And then more confusion for the user. Imagine, of course, every screen reader has its own commands, but imagine a standard QWERTY keyboard for a sighted user where the control key would do something else depending on the type of OS you use.
All right.
Well, Windows versus Mac.
Windows Mac.
Yeah, Windows versus Mac, yes. But imagine Windows...
Or even...
Windows 11 Home works in one way. Windows 11, I don't know. Or you press Enter. There are still commonly established conventions. And here... the operating system support is not enough. You still.
For those of us who can remember, think of computers in the 1980s, where different models, different operating systems.
Some of us can.
Yes, it was crazy.
So basically, if I hear you correctly, the point is not to oversell HID Braille, I mean, while we realize this brings benefits, like for example, I can connect my Focus to my iPhone with a cable, USB-C cable, and it works for basic stuff. This is a moving target,
Yes.
and
Yes.
some things may not work as advertised.
That's fair.
That's fair. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair to say. And this is why I encourage Braille display manufacturers. I was especially assisting on something with HIMSS recently with the HID support, and I told them you need to explain very well in the manual exactly what works and what doesn't work, because then at the end the user would be very confused.
But then it's going to be a very long manual.
Yeah, that's the other problem. No problem how well we explain things in manuals. It's still confusing. It's really
and a lot of people only read manuals when they break something.
That's true. They don't read it until it doesn't work.
A question for the panelists. I connect my iPhone to my Braille display via USB-C, so via USB, and my display is okay, but my iPhone's battery gets run down real fast. Why so?
Of course, your phone is acting as the host, and your Braille display is happy if it's allowed to draw current from your phone, and your phone battery is not going to support that for very long.
Right. So be aware of this. Like,
Yes.
I was kind of, oh, wow, I'm going to have a setup where without Bluetooth hassles, you just connect the wire and you run with this the whole day and you write on this, blah, blah, blah. No way.
Braille displays are hungry. Go ahead, Matthew.
I was going to say, you've got to be careful. So what we're essentially saying is your phone will try and charge your Braille display. And
Yes.
because your phone is charging your Braille display, the phone's battery is being depleted. There might be, and I haven't tried this, there might be ways around this. For example, I have a really neat little, it came from some company whose name I can't pronounce, and it's very, never quite sure whether to trust the brand or not. But I have this wonderful little USB-C cable, and you plug it into a USB-C port, and it creates two USB-C ports. And I use this I have a laptop with two USB-C ports, and that's it. So if I want to connect my laptop charger and my Mantis and my headset, I connect the Mantis and the headset to the splitter, and then the splitter to the USB-C port. Now, I'm not sure what would happen if I plugged a charger and a Braille display into a splitter and then connected the splitter into the phone. I don't think you're going to electrocute yourself by doing it. I'm not sure if it would charge the display but not the phone, or the phone but not the display, or whether it would charge both, and it would probably depend on how powerful your charger was.
Right.
But if this was a setup that for whatever reason you really needed to work, you probably could find a way around it, but it would involve experiments like that.
So that really speaks to a more general condition of all of us who are blind, and we have to be technology users. There is, because accessibility and everything else isn't equal, if I can say it that way. You notice
Very
that
diplomatic.
we have to have a higher level of expertise, sometimes even just to enter the playing field. We're not talking about leveling the playing field, but Matthew is now saying, look, you want to use your Braille display, you don't want it to run your battery down. You've got to go figure out if you can get a special cable and a power supply, and does the power supply the 2+ amps at 5 volts and all of this stuff. And that's true across the board with a lot of access tech. It is incumbent upon us to have to know a lot more than our sighted colleagues, which goes back to the manual and everything else. It is a challenge for us, and not because we're blind, but because stuff isn't as out of the box accessible as maybe we'd like it to be.
And by the way, I might be a little bit dense, folks, but I've had too many occasions over the years where I was trying to connect my Braille display to my device with a cable, and it doesn't work.
Uh-huh.
And the problem was not with the Braille display. The problem was not with the device. The problem was either with the cable or with the connectors.
Yeah.
So one of the
Yeah.
very, very simple things to try is try another cable, because the cable you're trying to use, especially, we get those new devices, like very cheap, with those whimsy thin USB-C
Thin
cables.
cables.
Yep.
Yes.
Don't.
You want a
just
fat
don't.
cable.
Yeah.
Especially with USB-C, they made it very confusing. Every time when people introduce something to make it easier,
Yeah.
you need to think, because USB-C, for example, is a very wide specification, and you have cables and devices that support or don't support certain features. And yeah, what should become simple sometimes becomes complicated.
Yes.
We've spent quite a lot of time on this first quadrant.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we're going to be faster now. We're going to go quicker now. So we've been talking about USB, hid Braille via USB. If we replace that USB with Bluetooth, do things get any easier?
Even more complicated.
Yeah. Not today, it doesn't.
Okay.
No, not yet.
How do you add, like for example, with an iPhone, is there a difference in adding a Braille display via Bluetooth, depending on what kind of connection, what kind of protocol that's using?
Yes, there is.
Tell us about that.
If it's a HID display, HID Braille display, you can go to settings, Bluetooth without voiceover, and add it as another standalone Bluetooth device, like you do with a keyboard or other accessories. Versus if it is a Braille display that works with a legacy protocol, then with a serial over Bluetooth, you have to add it through voiceover itself, not through the main Bluetooth settings of the operating system. And then
So we are all used to adding a Braille display to an iPhone or an iPad by going to VoiceOver, Braille, and it's looking for a Braille display, searching for a Braille display. With today's HID Braille displays, that's no longer the case. You go to Bluetooth, and the
you
display,
can still add them from voiceover, but you don't have to.
you don't have to.
Right.
And the display will still have to be discoverable, and that's up
Yes.
to your display manufacturer to explain how to make that happen.
True.
Now, there is one advantage of this. I said about not using HID, and I stick by that. But there is one quite big advantage of using HID over Bluetooth with an iOS device in particular.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and that is that if you use a legacy Braille device using iOS over Bluetooth, as soon as you lock your phone, the connection
yes.
breaks.
Yes.
So you could be in another room. You could have your phone in one room and you're in another room with your Braille display, and you leave it alone for a bit and your screen locks. You've got to go back to the other room where your phone is to unlock your phone and hope that the connection reestablishes, which most of the time it will, but it'll take a couple of seconds.
Yes.
And then you go back into the next room and you're all dandy. Now,
Isn't that fitness, though?
it is fitness, but it's
adds
not
to your steps per
necessarily
day.
convenient.
There you go,
It's
a
true.
disadvantage.
Let's say
No
you've
fitness.
left your phone in the other room because somebody's having a private meeting. So someone's having a
Right.
private meeting. You needed to go to the next room. You took your Braille display. You forgot your phone wasn't in your pocket, so it's in there. And this person's having a private meeting, so you can't go back into the other room and get your phone. You know, you're just kind of stuck. So HID Braille on iOS over Bluetooth, which is the only set of conditions in which I've tried it, doesn't break the connection. So if your screen locks, you see this all the time on the Brailliant and the Mantis devices. If your screen locks, you can press a button on the Braille display, such as a cursor routing button, and the phone will unlock and you'll get the passcode prompt.
That is
and
true.
Your
That's a good.
display will still
Yes.
be connected all the way through.
Does anybody know if it works on Android as well?
It does.
It-
Okay.
I was going to say it should, but I have not. Yeah.
But on Android, what is funny is that it also works with non-HID Braille
Yeah.
displays. They
Yeah.
have a way to keep it active, and you can unlock
that's-
it.
That's right, because the iOS treats Braille displays differently via Bluetooth than it does keyboards.
Yes.
It because it's been for years and years and decades. You've been able to at least a decade, you could wake up your iPhone or iPad or whatever with a keyboard just via
Yeah.
Bluetooth, and they being Apple have from the beginning handled Braille displays differently, and historically they have maintained that. So that's Android had done it differently, and your Braille displays found it pretty easy to wake up the Android devices.
And okay, let me put it this way. I was trying to think how to frame this question, but HID Braille via Bluetooth on a Windows PC. Has any of you gentlemen found a reason why you use that combination other than testing, if your work is involved with testing? Because I have not.
Yeah.
To be
I have
honest,
to admit.
over Bluetooth, I don't really know a lot of the time whether I'm using HID
I don't care.
or serial. I launch my screen reader and I get Braille
And it
I
runs.
press buttons and it works. And so
Yes.
over
Yeah,
USB, I
that
feel
is
like
true.
I have slightly more control over whether it's in HID or serial. But over Bluetooth, I really just don't have a clue as long as it works, you know?
That is
Yeah,
true.
I agree.
I'm afraid that's me too.
And
On
we
some-
don't
I've already
know
lost
which
my
language
head.
is talking, which protocol it's using, and we don't care.
It is just sad sometimes on some products. For example, there are some products that, thanks to HID, have better screen reader support over USB because of the screen reader's capabilities, because the legacy drivers were lacking. And then when you switch between a USB HID connection to a Bluetooth connection on some products, you might find various differences in keyboard commands and in what features are supported or not supported, because the Bluetooth on most of them by default is still legacy. So on products that have a properly done legacy driver, it does not matter. But on products that don't, and in case of some vendors that is the case, then you will have a much, I would say, a bigger learning curve, and you would have to adjust between the two. So you have to be careful.
We have gradually transitioned and very nicely transitioned to legacy. So HID Braille is like 2025, 2026, but there are plenty of Braille displays around which know nothing of HID Braille. And we do have to use legacy on Bluetooth, over USB or over Bluetooth. And I'd like to come up with a word called driver hunting.
Yes.
And we've all been on that hunt. And I understand the first thing, and you explained this, and Adi was talking about it. It takes a driver sometimes to have your Braille display talk to your computer. And then it takes a driver to talk, or to have your Braille display work to a screen reader. And the driver may be included in the screen reader or may not be included in the screen reader. Is there a process you would advise people use when they've got a display and they need to connect it to a computer? Because with Android and iOS, it's kind of easier. You search for the display, you either find it or you don't, and that's all. On Windows, however, there's a bit more variables. So how do you go around?
I've got to be honest. I find that Windows is not the best at this, and I also very sadly find that JAWS is not the best at this.
Definitely.
There's a brilliant little Linux program called BRLTTY, and Adi has
Yes.
touched on this earlier on. And there are some Windows screen readers, Narrator, but let's not talk about Narrator because that causes a whole load of other problems. But certainly NVDA will proxy its Braille support if you ask it to through BRLTTY. And BRLTTY has the most amazing collection of Braille display drivers for Braille displays that just don't exist anymore.
I apologize. What is BRLTTY and what does it have to do with Windows? I thought this is a Linux-related stuff that only Linux geeks take care of.
Well, so did I, until I discovered that somehow, don't ask me how, Windows screen readers have been able to compile BRLTTY for Windows.
BRLTTY exists for Windows.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
They release it for Windows.
You learn something new every day.
Yes.
So BRLTTY just has a whole bunch of support, and so just kind of to finish off the answer to the main question, what would I do if I had a legacy Braille display? It was a display in a cupboard. I didn't know whether it was going to work or not. To be honest, the first thing I'd probably do is connect it and start NVDA, because there's a very high likelihood that NVDA will see it, and there's much less of a likelihood, sadly, that JAWS will.
Yes, if it's a HID device, not a HID Braille device, but a HID device. If it's something like even the Focus, even though NVDA has auto detection for it, it will not work without the driver by default, unless again you broadcast through BRLTTY, and I would say something about BRLTTY in a second, but because you made a very good point, but.
Well, and it's true. And I think so my first step would be try it with NVDA and see if it works. My second step would be, if it doesn't work, you'll need to go and find a driver, and you're looking at Google at this point, and possibly some sites that are less reputable than others, shall we say, to try and get hold of those drivers.
You're having to web mine.
Yeah.
And I would add that I say unfortunately, but there were reasons why, but some time ago, maybe 2023, 24, ID may remember, but JAWS development had to go through and discard, if you will, a lot of the really, really old drivers. And I think it was compatibility issues as JAWS was moved forward to be to work better with new Windows. There was some legacy drive. Who remembers the Rabbit Braille display, for example? You know, those kinds of things.
Was that a Baum thing, or?
I don't know, man. I've been around since 2000, and I have no idea what it was. But you'll notice a lot of those old drivers that used to be in the Braille settings, add, remove Braille displays, they're gone. So time rolls on.
Now, Nermin is telling us that he used to use BRLTTY for Android, on Android for his help tech display, because that was not supported by Android.
Yes,
so
BRLTTY exists.
Common denominator.
It exists on Android. I mean, now it's built into TalkBack. They rely on it, but it exists on Android also existed, at least before, as a standalone screen reader that you can run alongside TalkBack. But just one thing about Windows, if folks will get BRLTTY and install it, be careful, because although it will help with the situation Matthew has described, and described really well, it would cause you, I know, Matthew, you did not want to mention Narrator, but if you install BRLTTY for Windows out of the box, it does the same thing. It will prevent the need for you to use Braille display drivers if you don't know where to get them. But it has its own drivers through something called libUSB, which I'm not going to get deep into, but the bottom line is, if you install BRLTTY for Windows and do not configure it properly, although your display will work fine with everything that uses BRLTTY, including sending NVDA to BRLTTY, other screen readers that don't use it and require proper support from the driver from the Braille display manufacturer will fail to operate with it. So,
but even with that limitation, BRLTTY with either NVDA or Narrator would be the lowest common denominator for trying to connect an older Braille display.
That is true.
At least to get some mileage out of it.
Yeah, but we have regular tech support calls when Windows installs an update and Narrator installs its drivers.
Trust me, Oleg, it's true what you said, but as soon as as soon as that customer would want to use another screen reader, the amount of headache to get out of it, if you're not tech savvy, is
Right.
Very
It's hard.
Sometimes it works when you just go to narrator and disable it in the settings,
Yes.
but it does not always work.
No. And this becomes even more important. Let's say you have a Braille display in the closet, you've got it working with BRLTTY, everything's fine. And this has allowed you, because you can demonstrate that a Braille display is useful to you, this has allowed you to get funding for a more recent Braille display.
Yeah.
So you get a brand new Braille display, you plug that Braille display in, immediately BRLTTY says, hey, it's a Braille display, I've got control now. And JAWS comes along and it can't get control back because BRLTTY's got a pretty
Exactly.
big stranglehold
Yeah.
over
And
that
you have to
display.
uninstall the component
Yeah.
in Windows
Yeah.
components installation. Okay. A couple of troubleshooting questions for people who deal often with tech support calls. Hey, I'm on Windows and my Windows doesn't see my Braille display. I'm going to Bluetooth. I'm searching for device. It sees a couple of devices, but not my Braille display. How would you troubleshoot that?
Well, it depends because sometimes people just connect Braille display without any screen reader running and then complain that it doesn't work.
All right. Yeah. One thing I've seen is, I've done it more than once, is looking for a Braille display, trying to search for a Braille display without making it discoverable. And the other thing I've seen, I don't know if they corrected this, but like some time ago in Windows, you had to click on advanced.
Yes, in
Yes.
Windows 11 especially.
Because otherwise your Braille
Depends on the Braille device. So, especially with the Focus, by the way, that's very common, what you're describing. But essentially, there are now, Bluetooth is also a complicated thing, like everything else, and there are several Bluetooth standards now. There is something that's called Bluetooth Low Energy and Bluetooth Classic, and many of these Braille devices are still running on Bluetooth Classic, and sometimes Microsoft likes to hide those devices under the advanced section. But to say the first thing that you have to check is, like Oleg said very well, check how to make your device discoverable. That's the first thing, because this is why I appreciate, I'm not using it anymore as primary, but this is why I still appreciate the Focus, because there it's very simple. Turn it on and everything is discoverable automatically, wirelessly. You don't have to do much. And with the other displays, you really have to check. It's quite simple on the Brilliant, for example, the Mantis. It's right there in the menus, and there's also a key to make it happen if you know. But you still have to go and check it. You cannot just turn on the display and expect it to be found wirelessly, in most cases.
On many, yeah.
I've got just one final question, and then we'll go into Q&A time. I know Raina had some questions, Michal had some questions. If you in the audience, you have any questions, press, and you're on Windows, press Alt-H to start the chat and write your question in the chat, or you will be able to raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute, but maybe typing it in the chat would still be faster. And of course, our working group members can just go ahead and ask a question by speaking by voice, because there's got to be an advantage to being a working group member. But anyway, the final question for me is just this. In my work with Braille displays, I'm noticing that, well, I like that expression. I think Ron used this, or was it Matthew? That you get, your mileage may vary with Bluetooth. Let me explain. If I'm using a Braille note taker and I'm doing a lecture or conducting a seminar, and I just need this thing to work. I mean, I press a key command, press a key and it works, it responds. I press the advanced bar or whatever, and it moves. There is stability. One thing I'm finding, though, is with Bluetooth, that's not always the case. I would like to be working in a situation where my phone is in my pocket, my display is in my hand, I'm doing a lecture, and I am kind of protected from the danger of saying, "Oh, just a moment, my braille display is not working. I've lost it." But so far, I haven't found the magic bullet that will do this. Was I looking in the wrong places, or especially for those of you who have experience with note takers, or really the most stable thing is a note taker, then a USB connection, and then a Bluetooth connection? Can I expect stability from a Bluetooth connection? And if so, what kind of equipment should I be using for that?
I think there's an extra layer in this. It's not just about the type of connection, it's also about the operating system and the device that operating system is running on. Getting Bluetooth connected can be a problem. I tend to find that once Bluetooth is connected, it is pretty stable nowadays, but comparing Bluetooth on an iPhone to USB on a computer isn't a fair comparison, because if my phone's in my pocket and I move and I touch the screen of the phone, if my pocket touches the screen of the phone or something, that's actually the bigger problem here. It's not that it's connected via Bluetooth to the iPhone, it's that the iPhone got knocked. And that's much more likely to happen on a mobile device than on a computer.
I would prefer USB connection for presentations, because if we are talking about this combination. But usually if I do presentation and I don't need a screen, I would prefer to use Braille display on itself, not connected, just internal applications.
It's really interesting. I've actually done quite a lot of presentations relatively. I mean, I don't do that many presentations, but when I do presentations, I've done quite a lot of them using a Braille display connected to a laptop over Bluetooth and done it through PowerPoint. And the reason for that is because I can pace about and walk around the room and things if I need to, and I can use the Bluetooth Braille display, A, to read my presentation, and B, as a clicker for the PowerPoint to move it on to the next slide. And I find that actually works surprisingly well a lot of the time.
Yeah, I just have a really small laptop, like it's 8-inch screen, so it's easy to carry. But if yes, and I would agree, if I need to move presentation, I mean, yes, but if I just need my text, my notes, I would use it just internal applications, and then I can just hang a Braille display on my neck, and then I can move around and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. We would like to leave some time for questions and answers. I don't see any questions in the chat. I remember Rainer had a question even before this table talk, but I'm not sure. We may have answered this in the process, but I don't know. That anybody who has questions, feel free to ask. You raise your hand and we'll see your hand raised, and we'll ask you to unmute. Rainer, Michal, anybody in the working group, any questions or comments on specific Braille displays or connection issues, please go ahead.
Let me start with a very general question, and one person has raised his hands already. It's very interesting listening you talking to each other and writing up these problems and solutions about the connection of Braille displays. But if I'm not so very skilled in all these things, for example, this Braille TTY, I have heard of it, but I don't know if I would be able to find it somewhere to know how to install it and what to do next to facilitate the connection. So what about people who are not familiar with these technical details so deeply? What what can they do? What can I do if I just want my Braille display to work? And who can I ask? Where can I read? What to do? There are very simple and easy explanations about all these things that you talked about.
That's actually a beautiful one because, I mean, we like to present everything. Oh, it's so simple. You do this and this and then that and that and then this and this again. Well, just simple. And then a person wants to just get it connected and get it working. While you're thinking about this, I'm remembering, okay, Ron remembered the computers of 1980s. My memory doesn't go that far. I remember 1994 when somebody said, oh, it's so easy to install that sound card. You just set this jumper and you find the right IRQ and it probably works. And then if it doesn't, you find a different IRQ and that's all. And I go, gee, really? So is it really that frustrating? And where do you go to get like quick assistance or immediate assistance, if at all possible?
Well,
where would you, ladies and gentlemen, where would you go?
I think we've really tried to go into a lot of detail in this, and it's ended up being quite technical. I think my advice is if you're using a modern Braille display, and by modern I mean anything that's come out since about 2020 or 2021, so Brailliant BIX, Mantis and Brailliant BIX on, any sort of modern Braille display, really, you're not going to have too many difficulties. We've talked about a lot of this stuff. In fairness, a lot of this stuff does tend to happen in the background, and most of the time it will work. And it's written up quite nicely in the various user guides for the various Braille displays. If you want independent help, then certainly organisations like the Braillists, particularly through things like the Braille Bar that we run, we could give you a little bit of help on that journey. And the technical support departments for your screen reader and for your Braille display really ought to be able to help. And as long as your Braille display is less than a few years old, you should be okay with that. For older Braille displays, I don't know. I think you probably need to have a fairly technically minded friend who can come and set it up for you, and then hopefully you'll be good to go once he's gone.
I'd like to agree with what you said about the manuals, but after reading some of them, not all of them, okay, sometimes I have the impression, okay, they tell you about how to make things work, but they rarely tell you about what to do if things don't work.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
But if they did, then of course they would just be too long, and we don't like to read manuals anyway.
Usually for beginners, like really beginners, I usually recommend start from USB connections because it tends to be easier.
Yeah, Andre has his hand, well, no longer, but Andre is now unmuted. So Andre, hello and welcome. What's your
Hello,
question?
everyone. Yeah, here's Andre from Strasbourg, France speaking. I just want to comment, and basically it's a fancy way to say hello, because I see lots of familiar faces, although I'm blind from birth, for those of you who don't know.
I don't have the driver necessary. So.
Yeah. My eye drivers unfortunately don't work. But I see lots of familiar faces, like most of you are either my friends or my people I know. Let's put it like that. And just wanted to say thank you to the European Braille Working Group to putting this, because as a Braille I like to call myself a Braille warrior. As a Braille warrior, I think that Braille is not like important. Is a weak word. Is the weakest word I can say. It's vital for blind people. Yeah, it's and I'm super glad to hear you, Svetlana. By the way,
Same here.
we used to work together before. So anyway, thank you so much. Just hello. Keep the good work. Keep the good job, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. So we've got probably a couple of more minutes. I will give some closing remarks about the next round table. While I do so, if anybody has any more questions, please go ahead and write them or raise your hand. That's your, as the last boarding call. That's your last boarding call. There is a hand raised from Ilya, but I'll still finish up and then, yeah.
So, I have a question back to the audience, perhaps.
To the audience, okay.
What would you like, after hearing all of this, what would you ask a Braille manufacturer, a Braille display manufacturer, or a screen reader vendor to do as a user to help you get out of this mess and at least understand the things better? What would you like to see?
Okay, so the question is, as a user, what would you like Braille display manufacturers to do or to provide to make the process of setting up the Braille display simpler? Is that a fair paraphrase?
Yeah, or the screen reader.
Or the screen reader. What would you... Now, Michal is here, right? Michal Tkachik, because Michal is responsible for all of our web-related stuff. Do we have a mailing address or do we have some contact that we can now give to our audience and to those who will be listening to the recording where they can write, like send a message?
Yes, of course we do. You can use the email address you received the invitation from. It's team@livingbraille.eu.
team@livingbraille.eu. Thank you. So if you have something you would like to share with Braille display manufacturers, at least those present here, and let me divulge a secret, there will be more in our next webinars, in our next roundtables, because that's something that Braille display manufacturers are interested in. And this will be a good bait, and I'm using that word in a positive sense, to attract them. So what would you say to Braille display manufacturers and screen reader developers to make it easier, like the setup? Somebody in chat says, make it as simple as plugging in the keyboard or a mouse. Isn't that what Hit Braille is supposed to do?
I think we're on the way to it, certainly. We're not there yet, but maybe in sort of 2 or 3 years' time, we might be a bit closer to it.
Sorry, Ilya, you raised your hand.
I'm unmuting. Yes, I am unmuting.
I sent you the request to unmute yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also wanted just to say hello and just say that I'm also blind from birth, and I'm a Braille user since 7 or 8 years old. I just think that, if you're blind, it's quite necessary for you to know Braille, to read Braille books, to read something in Braille, and of course, Braille displays is just a great help. Well, I have a Braille display. I have multiple devices. I have a Windows PC. I have my iPhone. I have my iPad. I even have my watch. I just don't understand, why do I need to connect my Braille display to my watch?
We'll talk about this in the controlling session, actually, in February.
Yeah, because, I've tried that, but I just don't see, for now, I don't see any point in doing that.
Okay. Thank you, Ilya.
Of course, there are familiar faces like Oleg, Adi, Svetlana. Hello, and just thank you for the idea of such webinars, because I think it's going to be really useful for those who want to learn more about Braille, who want to learn how to be more efficient with their Braille displays.
Thank you. So last Wednesday of February, we're having the next table talk, exactly the same time, I think exactly the same Zoom link, but there will be new announcements, and we'll let you know when that's available. And also for this one, we're planning to produce an article with all of or most of what was presented here written up, and to make it available, at least part of it, to make that available as a sound recording for you to listen to. And thanks to the European Blind Union and for the Working Group on Braille and the Steering Group on Braille of the European Blind Union for making this table talk possible. Aina, any closing comments from you?
What shall I say? I thank you very much to our panelists. It was really a pleasure for me to listen to you, to know that there's development and that our access to technology improves and gets further step by step, and that we are doing things now that we could not imagine some years before. And yes, these things give me hope that this development will advance. And and there are people in the world, blind people, Braille users, who know how to do this, who we can ask, who volunteer to be panelists in such a table talk here. Yeah, which gives us the opportunity to learn about these developments and to get an impression what is possible, and then to get further with our devices that we use and that we have or that we will have. So it was really amazing for me. And and thank you also to all the people who were here listening. And I hope you also found something for you to learn and to know and to get further with your devices and your things that you are doing with your technical devices. And I am very curious on the next meeting, because then it will get more and more practical, not only connection, but activity with product display. And this will be great, I guess.
But that's going to be a mess. Somebody said today, imagine that the control key fulfilled different functions. That's exactly what we're going to see. You connect a Braille display to Android, to Windows, to iOS, and the same Braille command controls the device in a different way. I don't know how we're going to untangle that mess, but with our experts, we'll be able to. The panelists, thank you for joining us. Any final comments for today from any of y'all?
Just to say thank you very much for having us. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to the next session.
Absolutely. Same from me. And also, it was great being here with all of you guys. I learned stuff from everybody, and that's one of the joys of being on a panel like this with other people. I come away, I think, with more than I bring to the table.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much. It's really an honor for me to be on such a wonderful people. And yes, I learned some stuff here too.
Same here. I would also like to thank you for the great opportunity. And of course, I also learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to what comes next.
And keep brailing and visit livingbraille.eu. Thank you, everyone, and have a good one. Bye.
Bye-bye.